She had every reason to keep walking. 17 years old, pockets empty, rain soaking through her only hoodie. 2 bus transfers still ahead, and not a single person in her life who could come pick her up. But Willa Reeves stopped. An old woman stood at the curb, trembling, confused, alone. No umbrella, no phone, no one coming for her. Dozens of people had already walked past. Some looked, most didn't. Willa unzipped her hoodie and wrapped it around the stranger's shoulders. Then she took her hand. She didn't ask who the woman was, didn't think about what she'd lose. She just held on. That decision, that one small, stupid, beautiful decision, was about to change everything. Yeah, nobody there realized what that moment would lead to. Anyway, let's start today's story. The old woman wouldn't let go of Willa's hand. Not in a desperate way, more like a child who'd found something familiar in a room full of strangers. Her fingers were cold, thin, the kind of thin that made Willa think of her grandmother's hands after a long day at the sewing machine. "I need to go home," the woman whispered. "The blue door. My son will worry." "Okay," Willa said. "What's your address?" The woman blinked, looked around, then looked at Willa like she'd just asked the question in a language she didn't speak. No ID, no phone, no purse. Just the paper bag, soggy, pressed against her ribs. Inside, a half-eaten blueberry muffin and a pharmacy receipt so wet the ink was bleeding. Willa pulled out her cracked phone, dialed 911, got transferred to the non-emergency line. A recording told her the estimated wait was over 2 hours. 2 hours. She looked at the woman, still trembling, still holding her hand. She couldn't leave her here. Grandma Odessa's apartment sat on the 3rd floor of a building where the elevator had been broken since before Willa was born. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen so small you had to turn sideways to open the fridge. But it was clean. It was warm. And it smelled like whatever Odessa had been pressing with her iron that afternoon. Cotton and starch and something faintly like lavender. Odessa was at her sewing machine when the door opened. She looked up, saw Willa, saw the stranger. Her hands stopped moving. "Baby, who is this?" "I found her at the bus station," Willa said. "She's confused. She can't remember where she lives. I called 911, but they said 2 hours. I couldn't just leave her there." Odessa held up a hand. That was enough. She stood, walked to the stove, put the kettle on. Then she pulled the old quilt from the back of the couch, the one with the mismatched squares she'd sewn from fabric scraps over 20 years, and wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. "Sit down, sweetheart," Odessa said, not to Willa, to the stranger. The woman sat. Her eyes moved slowly across the apartment, the faded wallpaper, the photos on the shelf, the small wooden cross above the doorframe. Something in her face softened, like a knot loosening. Odessa placed a cup of tea in front of her, then a bowl of soup. Chicken and rice made that morning, stretched to last 3 days. The woman took a sip, closed her eyes. "You have kind hands," she said to Odessa. Odessa sat down across from her. "Kindness ain't expensive. That's why anybody can afford it." Willa leaned against the kitchen doorframe, watching. This was the woman who raised her. This was the house she grew up in. No money, no connections, no safety net. But when a stranger showed up soaking wet and scared, the kettle went on. The quilt came out. No questions asked. That was the only inheritance Odessa had to give, and it was more than enough. 14 miles away, a different kind of evening was unfolding. The Caldwell estate sat behind iron gates at the end of a stone driveway, lined with oak trees older than the state constitution. Inside, the study smelled like leather and old paper. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner, the only sound besides Gerald Caldwell's shoes on the hardwood floor. He was pacing, 71 years old, retired federal judge, silver hair, sharp jaw, posture like a man who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms. But tonight, his hands were shaking. His mother had been missing for 6 hours. "She left the house around noon," said Diane Holbrook, standing near the desk with a phone pressed to her ear. Mid-50s, tailored blazer, the kind of composure that looked professional from a distance but felt like armor up close. "The caretaker said she stepped out for a walk and didn't come back." Gerald stopped pacing. "She has dementia, Diane. She was supposed to have a caretaker with her at all times. That's why we pay for one." Diane's expression didn't crack. "I understand. I'm coordinating with the police now." "Coordinate faster." Gerald picked up his own phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Calvin, it's Gerald Caldwell. I need you to find my mother. Tonight." On the other end of the line, Calvin Moore picked up on the second ring. Private investigator, ex-military, the kind of man who answered calls at 11 p.m. without asking why. He said 3 words: "Send me everything." Gerald hung up. He stood at the window. Rain streaked the glass. Somewhere out in that rain, his 74-year-old mother was alone, confused, and afraid. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. "Where are you, Mom?" 14 miles away, Eleanor Caldwell was sitting in a tiny kitchen, wrapped in a handmade quilt, drinking chicken soup made by a stranger. She didn't know where she was, but for the first time in 6 hours, she felt safe. 5:30 a.m. Willa's alarm buzzed from the cracked phone on her nightstand. She reached over and silenced it without opening her eyes. 3 seconds of stillness. That was all she allowed herself. Then she got up. First thing she did was check the couch. The old woman was still there, curled under Odessa's quilt, breathing slow and steady. Calmer than last night. Whatever storm had been running through her mind seemed to have quieted, at least for now. Willa moved through her morning the way she always did. Quiet, efficient, like someone who'd learned a long time ago that the world doesn't wait for you to be ready. She opened the fridge, half a carton of eggs, a few slices of bread, a container of leftover rice. She packed a lunch for school, 2 slices of bread with peanut butter, an apple starting to wrinkle, a bottle filled with tap water. She ironed her school uniform on the kitchen counter because they didn't own an ironing board. White shirt, navy pants, both a little too short. She'd grown 2 inches over the summer, and there was no money for new ones. She counted the cash in the envelope on top of the fridge. $14, 5 days until Friday. This was Willa's life. Not tragic, not dramatic, just tight. Every dollar accounted for, every decision weighed against what they could afford to lose, which was almost nothing. Her mother left when she was 6. No note, no phone call after, just an empty closet and a silence that filled the apartment for weeks. Her father, James Reeves, worked at a warehouse on the east side. Good man, strong hands, the kind of father who walked her to school every morning, rain or shine, quizzing her on spelling words the whole way. He died on a Tuesday. Forklift accident. The company called it operator error. Fought the insurance claim for 2 years and won. Willa and Odessa got nothing. After that, Odessa became everything. She sewed clothes for other people 12 hours a day so Willa could have dinner on the table and shoes on her feet. Willa started working at 15, cleaning offices on weekday evenings, stocking shelves on Saturday mornings. Every dollar went into a jar labeled future. She didn't know what that future looked like yet, but she knew it started with community college. And community college started with money she didn't have. She wasn't bitter. She was tired. There's a difference most people never bother to understand. That morning, Willa sat at the kitchen table with the paper bag from last night. The pharmacy receipt was damp but readable. A prescription for donepezil, early-stage dementia, prescribed to Eleanor Caldwell. The pharmacy address was across town, deep in the wealthy part of the city where Willa had never been. She typed the name into her phone. Screen loaded slow, the way it always did. Then a photo appeared. A society page from a charity gala. A woman in a cream-colored gown standing next to a tall, silver-haired man in a tuxedo. Caption: Eleanor Caldwell and her son, retired federal judge Gerald Caldwell, at the annual Caldwell Foundation benefit. Willa stared at the screen, then looked at the couch. Same woman, thinner, more fragile, but the same face. She showed Odessa. Odessa looked at the photo, looked at the couch, looked at Willa. Don't matter who she's connected to. She's a person who needs help. We call them and return her safe. So Willa called. The Caldwell Foundation's public number. Transferred once, twice, 3 times. Finally, a voice picked up. Caldwell Foundation, Diane Holbrook speaking. Willa explained everything. Found her at the bus station, brought her home. She's safe. She's warm. Silence. Then Diane spoke again. The warmth was gone. You have her? Where exactly? What's your name? How did you get access to her? Not like someone relieved, like someone building a case. Willa answered every question, honestly, completely. Diane said she'd send someone, hung up without saying thank you. Willa put the phone down. Something felt wrong. She couldn't name it yet, but she felt it. Wait. So this girl's got $14. That's it. 14. Then she finds out the woman sleeping on her couch is connected to real power. And she doesn't start thinking, what can I get out of this? She just calls to give it back. No angle, no little plan. And I'm being real here. Most people? Yeah, they're not doing that. A black SUV pulled up outside Willa's building the next morning. Not the kind of car that belonged on this street. A few neighbors on the stoop noticed. One of them nudged the other. Nobody said anything, but everybody watched. Calvin Moore stepped out. Tall, clean-shaven. The kind of man who moved like every step had a purpose. He wore a plain jacket and carried nothing but a phone and a small notepad. Willa buzzed him in. He walked into the apartment and stopped. Eleanor was sitting at the kitchen table, wrapped in Odessa's quilt, eating a piece of toast with jam. She looked up at him the way you'd look at a stranger in your own home. No fear, no recognition, just calm. Calvin stood there for a moment. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked around. The small kitchen, the sewing machine in the corner, the photos on the shelf, the quilt around Eleanor's shoulders. Everything modest, everything clean, everything full of something money can't buy. He took a photo of Eleanor, then another of the apartment, not for evidence, for proof. Proof that this woman had been cared for. He spoke to Willa in the hallway. You did a good thing. Mr. Caldwell will want to thank you personally. Willa leaned against the wall. She was cold. I wasn't going to leave her. Calvin nodded, wrote something in his notepad. Then he helped Eleanor to the car. She held Willa's hand all the way to the door. At the last second, she turned and looked at Willa with something that might have been recognition, or maybe just warmth. Hard to tell with her. Thank you, sweetheart, Eleanor said. The SUV pulled away. Willa watched from the window until it turned the corner. Odessa came up behind her and put a hand on her shoulder. You did right, baby. Willa nodded. But she didn't feel right. She felt like something had just left the apartment that wasn't coming back. 2 days passed. Normal days. School, work,
dinner, homework at the kitchen table while Odessa sewed. Then a letter arrived. Not a bill, not a flyer, a real letter. Heavy, cream-colored envelope, the kind of paper Willa had never touched before. She ran her thumb across it. Smooth, thick. It felt like it cost more than her lunch for a week. Inside, a handwritten note on matching stationery. Dear Miss Reeves, I would be honored if you and your grandmother would join me for dinner at my home this Saturday evening to express my personal gratitude for your extraordinary kindness toward my mother. Sincerely, Gerald Caldwell. Willa read it twice, then handed it to Odessa. Odessa read it once, took off her glasses, put them back on, read it again. Well, she said, I guess I need to press my good dress. Saturday came. Willa borrowed shoes from the neighbor downstairs, black flats, half a size too big. She stuffed tissue in the toes. Odessa wore her navy blue dress, the one she only brought out for funerals and church anniversaries. She pinned a small brooch to the collar. Her hands were steady, but her eyes were wide. A car arrived at 6. Not the SUV this time. A sedan. Dark. Quiet. A driver held the door open. They didn't talk much on the ride. Odessa looked out the window as the streets changed. Smaller houses became bigger houses. Bigger houses became estates. Chain-link fences became stone walls. Cracked sidewalks became manicured lawns. The car turned onto a long driveway lined with oak trees. At the end, the Caldwell estate rose up like something from a different century. Stone, glass, iron. A fountain in the courtyard that probably used more water in a day than Willa's building used in a week. Odessa whispered, Lord have mercy. Willa looked at the front door. Tall, heavy, polished wood. She didn't belong here. She knew that. Every part of this place was built for people who were not her. But she hadn't done anything wrong. She'd done something right. She squared her shoulders and walked in. The dining room was longer than Willa's entire apartment. A chandelier hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. The table could seat 12, but was set for 4. White cloth, silver cutlery, 3 forks on the left side of each plate. Willa looked at them and quietly decided she'd wait to see which one Gerald picked up first. Eleanor was already seated at the far end. She wore a soft blue cardigan, and her hair was combed neatly. She looked different here, smaller somehow, like the house was too big for her. But the moment Willa walked in, Eleanor's face changed. The girl with the warm hands, she said. Not Willa's name. She didn't remember that. But she remembered the feeling, and that was enough. Willa smiled. Hi, Eleanor. Gerald Caldwell stood at the head of the table. He was taller than Willa expected. The kind of tall that came with good posture and decades of people standing when he entered a room. Silver hair combed back, dark suit, no tie. His handshake was firm, but not aggressive. Miss Reeves, he said, thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting us, Willa said. Gerald turned to Odessa, extended his hand. Mrs. Reeves, it's a pleasure. Odessa shook it. Likewise, Mr. Caldwell. You have a beautiful home. It's too big for 2 people, Gerald said. My wife used to say the same thing. They sat down. A woman from the kitchen brought out the first course. Butternut squash soup in white bowls so thin Willa could almost see through them. She picked up the outermost spoon. Correct guess. The conversation started careful, polite. The way conversations go when people from different worlds are trying to find common ground without stepping on anything. Gerald asked about Willa's school. She told him, public school on the east side. She liked history, didn't love math, but got through it. She was on track to graduate in the spring. He asked about her plans. She was honest. Community college. I've been saving, but I'm not there yet. I work 2 jobs after school, cleaning offices and stocking shelves at a grocery store on Saturdays. She said it flat. No performance, no sob story, just facts. Gerald listened the way a judge listens. Careful, attentive, weighing every word not for weakness, but for truth. And after community college? I don't know yet. Maybe social work, maybe law, something where I can help people who don't have anyone in their corner. Gerald set his spoon down, looked at her for a long moment. Why law? Because when my father died, nobody fought for us. The company had lawyers. We had nothing. I was 12, and I remember thinking, if we had someone who knew how to fight with words instead of fists, maybe things would have been different. The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable, just still. The kind of still that happens when someone says something true and everybody in the room feels it. Odessa looked down at her soup. Her jaw was tight. She didn't talk about James much. Some wounds close, but never heal. Eleanor broke the silence. She reached across the table and patted Willa's hand. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. Then she frowned, trying to catch the memory. It slipped away. She smiled anyway. The main course came. Roasted chicken, green beans, potatoes. Food that was simple, but prepared like art. Willa ate slowly. Not because she wasn't hungry, because she wanted to remember this. Halfway through dinner, Gerald and Odessa discovered something. Odessa had done alterations for a law firm downtown 15 years ago. One of the senior partners was a man named Walter Brennan, who happened to be Gerald's former colleague on the federal bench. Walter always had his suits tailored too tight, Odessa said. Gerald laughed, a real laugh. He still does. The room warmed, not from the fireplace, from something simpler. After dinner, Gerald asked Willa to walk with him. They moved through a hallway lined with framed photos. Gerald shaking hands with governors, Gerald at a podium, Gerald with his late wife at some event where everyone wore black tie and smiled like they meant it. His study was at the end of the hall. Walls lined with legal books, a mahogany desk the size of a small boat, framed commendations, awards, letters from senators. Willa stood in the middle of the room and didn't touch anything. Gerald sat on the edge of his desk, casual, like he was trying to make the room feel less intimidating. Willa, I chair the Caldwell Foundation. We fund scholarships for young people of extraordinary character. Not just grades, not just test scores, character. Willa didn't say anything. She waited. I'd like to offer you a full scholarship. Tuition, books, living stipend, to the university of your choice. The room tilted, just slightly, just enough that Willa reached for the back of the chair next to her. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She stood very still for about 5 seconds. Then she said, "Are you serious?" Gerald nodded. "Can I have it in writing?" Gerald looked at her. Then he smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one. You'd make a fine lawyer, Willa. They shook hands. Willa's grip was steady. Her eyes were not. But she held it together because that's what she'd been doing her whole life. The car ride home was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Odessa stared out the window. The estates turned back into houses. The houses turned back into apartment buildings. The stone walls turned back into chain link. Then, Odessa started crying. Not loud, just tears running down her face, catching the streetlight every few seconds. Willa reached over and held her hand. "Grandma, I'm fine, baby. I'm fine. Your daddy would have—" She couldn't finish. She pressed her lips together and squeezed Willa's hand harder. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The good kind. When they got home, Willa checked her phone. A text from an unknown number. "Be careful what you accept from people like that. Nothing is free." She stared at it, read it twice, then deleted it. She told herself it didn't matter, but she didn't fall asleep for a long time that night. Meanwhile, back at the estate, Diana Holbrook stood in the doorway of Gerald's study, arms crossed, the same posture as always, but something sharper behind it. "You barely know this girl, Gerald. A background check, at least?" Gerald didn't look up from his desk. "She gave my mother the coat off her back, Diane. That's all the background I need." Diane nodded. "Of course." She turned and walked down the hallway. Her heels clicked on the marble, steady, measured, the sound of someone who was already thinking 3 steps ahead. And none of those steps included Willa Reeves getting any closer to this family. For a little while, things were good. Not perfect, not easy, but good. And for Willa, good was more than enough. She started the scholarship paperwork on a Monday evening at the kitchen table. Forms she'd never seen before. Words like institutional verification and disbursement schedule. She Googled every term she didn't understand, which was most of them. But she filled out every line. Carefully. In black ink. No mistakes. That Wednesday, she visited a college campus for the first time. Walked through the quad with a printed map in her hand, trying not to look like she didn't belong. The library had 3 floors. 3. Willa stood in the lobby and just looked up. She stayed there for almost a minute before a passing student bumped into her and said sorry. She told Terrence Davis the news on Saturday morning. Terrence ran the barber shop 2 blocks from Odessa's apartment. He'd been her father's best friend since high school. Big man, gentle voice, the kind of person who remembered your birthday and never forgot how you liked your hair. When Willa told him about the scholarship, Terrence put down his clippers. He looked at her. His eyes got wet, and he didn't try to hide it. "Your daddy would be so proud he couldn't breathe." Willa looked at the floor, smiled, said nothing. Some things don't need a response. That Sunday, Pastor Nolan Brooks mentioned it during service. Small congregation, 40, maybe 50 people. When he said Willa's name, they clapped. She ducked her head, embarrassed, but she was smiling so hard her cheeks ached. Odessa pinned the scholarship acceptance letter to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. And then there was Eleanor. Gerald called midweek. His mother had been asking for the girl. Would Willa mind visiting? She went on Thursday after school. They sat in the garden behind the estate. The afternoon was warm. Eleanor was lucid that day, clear-eyed, present. She told Willa about her late husband, about raising Gerald alone after he passed, about how people always assumed money made things simple. People forget, Eleanor said, that money doesn't make you warm. They sat together until the sun dropped low. 2 people with nothing in common except the thing that matters most. They liked each other. From an upstairs window, Diane Holbrook watched them. She picked up her phone, dialed a number, spoke quietly. We don't know what she said, but whatever it was, it had already started. It happened on a Tuesday. Willa was in 3rd period history when the classroom door opened. The principal stood there, gray suit, tight expression, the kind of face adults make when they're about to say something they've rehearsed. "Willa, can you come with me, please?" She picked up her bag. The whole class watched her walk out. Nobody said anything, but she could feel 30 pairs of eyes on her back. 2 detectives were waiting in the principal's office, a man and a woman. The man was leaning against the window ledge. The woman was sitting in the chair meant for students.
Neither of them smiled. Willa Reeves? Yes? We'd like to ask you some questions about Eleanor Caldwell. Willa sat down. She folded her hands on her lap the way Odessa taught her. Steady, respectful. Even when you're scared, you sit up straight. The questions started slow. How did you find Eleanor? Where did you take her? How long was she at your home? Did anyone else interact with her? Willa answered everything. The same answers she'd given Calvin Moore. The same answers she'd given Diane Holbrook on the phone. The truth doesn't change, so her story didn't either. Then the tone shifted. The male detective leaned forward. We've received a report that Mrs. Caldwell was wearing a diamond bracelet the night she went missing.
An heirloom piece, valued at several $1,000s. That bracelet has not been recovered. Willa's stomach dropped. I never saw a bracelet. The report states it was on her wrist when she left the Caldwell estate. I don't know about that. When I found her, she had a paper bag. That's it. No jewelry, no bracelet, nothing. The female detective opened a folder. You brought a confused elderly woman to your home. You kept her overnight. You didn't contact the authorities until the following morning. I called 911 that night. They said 2 hours. I wasn't going to leave her at a bus station in the rain for 2 hours. But you did take her home. Yes. To your apartment. Yes. Where you live with your grandmother, who makes a living as a seamstress. There it was, the thing underneath the questions. Not what Willa did, who Willa was, where she came from, how much she didn't have. The male detective said it plainly. You expect us to believe you just took a confused old woman home out of the goodness of your heart? Willa looked at him, directly, the way her grandmother looked at people when they said something ignorant, and she was deciding whether to correct them or let God handle it. Yes, Willa said, because that's what happened. They let her go, told her not to leave town, gave her a card with a case number on it. She walked out of the school building. The hallway was empty. Everyone was in class. Her sneakers squeaked on the tile, and the sound echoed off the walls like it was following her. The scholarship paperwork was frozen that afternoon, pending investigation. A form letter from the Caldwell Foundation arrived in her email. Professional, cold. Words like temporarily suspended and due diligence and resolution of outstanding matters. Willa read it at the kitchen table. Odessa read it over her shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a long time. Back at the estate, Gerald was standing in his study with the door closed. Diane sat across from him, legs crossed, hands folded. The posture of someone delivering bad news they'd been waiting to deliver. I noticed the bracelet was missing the day after Eleanor returned, Diane said. I didn't want to say anything at first. I hoped it would turn up. But it hasn't. Gerald's face was tight. You filed a police report without telling me? I filed it to protect the family, Gerald. That bracelet belonged to your mother. It's been in your family for 3 generations. And you think this girl took it. Diane paused, measured. I think a 17-year-old from that neighborhood had your mother in her apartment overnight with no supervision. I think the bracelet was there when Eleanor left this house and gone when she came back. I'm not making accusations. I'm asking you to consider the possibility. Gerald didn't respond right away. He turned to the window, the same window he'd pressed his forehead against the night Eleanor went missing. Gerald, I know you want to see the best in people, Diane said, softer now, almost gentle. But this girl comes from nothing. That bracelet is worth more than her grandmother makes in a year. You have to at least consider it. The words hung in the room. Gerald said nothing, and his silence was louder than anything Diane could have hoped for. The story spread fast. A local blog picked it up first. The headline read, Teen Good Samaritan accused of stealing from elderly woman she claimed to rescue. The comments section filled within hours. Some people defended Willa. Most didn't. The ones who didn't used words that made it clear this wasn't about a bracelet. It was about a black girl in a white woman's house. It was about what people assumed when they saw those two things next to each other. At school, friends stopped being friends. Not all of them, but enough. The girls who used to save her a seat at lunch suddenly had full tables. A teacher she liked avoided eye contact in the hallway. At the grocery store, her Saturday morning manager pulled her aside. "Maybe take a few weeks off, Willa, just until this blows over." He said it like he was doing her a favor. Willa walked home that evening. It was raining again, the same kind of rain as the night she found Eleanor. Heavy, steady, the kind that soaks through everything. She sat on the stoop of her building. She didn't have her hoodie. She'd given it away that night at the bus station and never got it back. She sat there in the rain, arms around her knees, no umbrella, no hood, just her. Odessa came outside. She didn't have an umbrella either. She sat down next to Willa on the wet concrete, close enough that their shoulders touched. She didn't say, "It'll be okay." She didn't say, "God has a plan." She didn't say any of the things people say when they don't know what else to offer. She said, "You know who you are. Don't let nobody rewrite that." Willa's eyes were red. "Maybe I should just give it up. The scholarship, all of it. Stop trying to be in spaces where I don't belong." Odessa turned and looked at her granddaughter. Hard. The way she looked at fabric before she cut it. Precise. Certain. "Baby, you belong wherever your character takes you, and your character took you to a woman in the rain. Don't you dare apologize for that." Willa leaned into her grandmother's shoulder. The rain kept falling. Neither of them moved. Calvin Moore couldn't sleep. It had been 3 days since the police report. 3 days since the story hit the blog. 3 days since a 17-year-old girl's name became something people typed next to words like thief and suspect and worse. And something about it didn't sit right. He sat at his desk in his apartment. Small place, neat. The desk was covered with notes and printouts from the Caldwell case. Not the bracelet case, the original one, the night Eleanor went missing. He pulled up the photos he'd taken at Willa's apartment that morning. The kitchen, the quilt, Eleanor eating toast, Willa standing in the hallway with her arms crossed, not asking for anything, not performing anything, just a tired girl who'd done a decent thing. No bracelet in any of the photos, not on Eleanor's wrist, not on the table, not anywhere. Calvin opened his notepad, flipped to the page from his first conversation with Diane Holbrook. She had told him Eleanor was wearing the bracelet when she left the estate that afternoon. That was the foundation of the entire accusation. But Calvin had also obtained the caretaker's daily log, standard procedure for dementia patients. Every medication, every meal, every personal item documented. He found the entry for that day. 2:15 p.m., Eleanor's jewelry removed before afternoon walk per routine. Bracelet, ring, and necklace placed in bedroom jewelry case. Calvin read it again, then a third time. The bracelet was removed before Eleanor left the house. She never had it on when she wandered to the bus station. She never had it on when Willa found her, which meant it was never in Willa's apartment, which meant someone was lying. Calvin dug deeper. He requested financial records from the Caldwell Foundation through a contact at the auditing firm. What came back made him put his coffee down and sit very still for a long time. Small transfers, dozens of them, spread across 4 years. Money moved from the foundation's operating accounts into a third-party vendor that, as far as Calvin could tell, didn't actually exist. The payments were approved by the same person every time, Diane Holbrook. The total was just under $600,000. Calvin understood now. The bracelet accusation was never about a bracelet. It was about distance. Diane needed Willa away from the family. A girl that close to Gerald, that close to Eleanor, spending time in the house, asking innocent questions, noticing things. Sooner or later, she might see something Diane couldn't afford to have seen. The accusation was a wall, built fast, built ugly, designed to keep a 17-year-old girl too scared and too busy defending herself to ever set foot in that house again. Calvin picked up his phone and called Gerald. "We need to talk, in person, tonight." They met in Gerald's study. Door closed. Calvin laid it out. The caretaker's log, the photos, the financial records, every piece, one by one, like a lawyer building a case. Which made sense. He was talking to a man who'd spent his career listening to exactly this kind of evidence. Gerald didn't interrupt. He sat in his leather chair and listened with his hands folded. His face didn't move, but his knuckles turned white. When Calvin finished, the room was quiet. "How long?" Gerald asked. "At least 4 years, maybe longer. The early records are harder to trace." Gerald closed his eyes. 15 years. He had trusted this woman for 15 years. She managed his calendar, his household, his mother's care, his foundation's finances. She was the last person he spoke to most nights, and the first voice he heard most mornings. And she had been stealing from him the entire time. But that wasn't what made his chest tight. What made his chest tight was a girl sitting on a wet stoop in the rain. A girl with no hoodie and no lawyer and no one in her corner except a 70-year-old seamstress. A girl he had almost believed was a thief because a woman in a tailored blazer said the right words in the right tone at the right time. He opened his eyes. "I need to see Willa." Calvin nodded. "I'll drive." Gerald shook his head. "No, I'll drive myself." Gerald Caldwell drove himself to Willa's neighborhood for the first time in his life. No driver, no SUV. A silver sedan that looked expensive on his driveway, but ordinary on these streets. He parked on the curb in front of Willa's building. A group of teenagers on the corner glanced at him. An old man on a folding chair near the entrance watched him walk to the door without saying a word. Gerald pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. Odessa's voice came through the speaker. Careful. Guarded. "Who is it?" "Mrs. Reeves. It's Gerald Caldwell." Silence. A long one. Then the door buzzed open. He climbed 3 flights of stairs. The elevator was broken. By the time he reached the 3rd floor, he was slightly out of breath. He thought about Willa climbing these stairs every day. After work, after school, with groceries, without ever mentioning it. Odessa opened the door. She looked at him with something harder than the first time they met. Not anger, something quieter. The look of a woman deciding whether the man in front of her deserved to be let in. She stepped aside. Gerald walked into the apartment. Same kitchen table, same sewing machine, same photos on the shelf. The room where Eleanor had eaten toast and felt safe. Willa was sitting at the table. She didn't stand up. She didn't smile. She looked at him and waited. Gerald sat down across from her. The chair was small. The table was small. Everything in this room was small. And Gerald Caldwell, retired federal judge, a man who had dined with governors and argued cases before the Supreme Court, sat in this tiny kitchen and felt the full weight of what he had almost allowed to happen. Willa. The accusation was false. She didn't react. Not yet. The bracelet was never missing. The caretaker removed Eleanor's jewelry before her walk that afternoon. It's documented in the daily log. The bracelet was in Eleanor's bedroom the entire time. Willa's hands were flat on the table. She pressed them down slightly. That was the only movement. The police report was filed by Diane Holbrook. Without my knowledge, she fabricated the claim. Gerald continued. Calvin discovered that Diane has been embezzling funds from the foundation for at least 4 years. The bracelet accusation was designed to push you away before anyone noticed the financial irregularities. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a car horn honked. The scholarship is reinstated, immediately. I've contacted the police to have the report formally withdrawn and expunged. He looked at his hands, then looked at Willa. I'm sorry. I should have questioned it the moment Diane brought it to me, instead of allowing even 1 second of doubt. You deserved better. Both of you did. He looked at Odessa when he said the last part. Her arms loosened, just slightly.
Willa was quiet for a long time. "I'm glad you believe me, but I need you to know something. I would have been telling the truth, even if you didn't." Gerald nodded slowly. "Character isn't what you do when people watch," he said.
"It's when they don't." He said it like he was hearing it for the first time, like a man who'd spent his career judging others and was only now understanding what that word really meant. Because a 17-year-old girl with $14 and borrowed shoes had taught it to him. He shook Willa's hand, shook Odessa's hand, walked down 3 flights of stairs and sat in his car for a while before starting the engine. The next morning, Gerald found Diane at her desk, laptop open, coffee untouched. She looked up when he walked in and immediately knew. He placed a folder on her desk, the caretaker's log, the financial audit, Calvin's report. "I trusted you for 15 years, Diane." She opened the folder. Her face changed with each page. Not shock, recognition. The face of someone who always knew this moment would come and had simply been betting it wouldn't come today. "I was protecting you, Gerald. That girl could have been anyone. She was someone who helped my mother when you were supposed to be watching her. Gerald, if you would just let me explain the caretaker. You dismissed her early that afternoon to save costs. Except you didn't save anything. You pocketed the difference. And because you sent her home, my mother walked out alone and ended up lost in the rain for 6 hours." Diane's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "You'll hear from my attorneys and the police." He walked out, closed the door, didn't look back. 2 days later, Gerald read a brief statement to a small group of local journalists at the Foundation office. He acknowledged Willa's kindness publicly. He stated that the accusation was baseless and driven by a trusted employee's personal agenda. He did not name Diane. The blog that ran the original story published a retraction. The comments shifted. Not all of them. Some people never changed their minds. But enough did. At school, classmates started talking to Willa again, saving her a seat, saying things like, "I always knew it was wrong." Willa was gracious. She smiled, said thank you. But she noticed who had stayed and who had left. She wouldn't forget either. That Thursday, Willa visited Eleanor at the estate. Eleanor was having a good day. Bright, lucid, sitting in the garden when Willa arrived, smiling before Willa even said hello. Eleanor took Willa's hand, the same way Willa had taken hers at the bus station. Gentle, certain. "I don't always remember things, sweetheart, but I remember how you made me feel. Safe." She reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small card. Yellowed, handwritten. A recipe for lemon cake, her late husband's favorite. "Family recipes are for family," Eleanor said. Willa held the card in both hands. She didn't say anything. She just held it, the way you hold something worth more than money. Because it was. 6 months later, Willa Reeves moved into a college dorm room. First time in her life she had a room to herself. 4 walls, a desk, a bed that was hers and only hers, a window looking out onto a quad where students walked between classes, carrying books and coffee and futures they probably took for granted. Odessa came to help her unpack. She brought a suitcase, a box of kitchen essentials, and the sunflower magnet from the fridge. They didn't have much. It didn't take long. Willa pinned 3 things above her desk: the scholarship acceptance letter, a photo of her father standing outside the warehouse where he worked, smiling, arms crossed, looking like a man who believed tomorrow would be better than today, and Eleanor's recipe card for lemon cake. Odessa stood in the middle of the room and turned in a slow circle, touched the desk, ran her hand across the bedspread, looked out the window. "Your daddy would have carried every box up those stairs himself," she said, then sat right there on that bed and cried. Willa smiled. He would have pretended he wasn't crying. That too. They held each other for a long time, the kind of hug where neither person wants to let go first. That evening, Willa called Gerald. Eleanor was doing well. New caretaker properly vetted. The foundation had been audited and restructured. Diane was facing criminal charges. Gerald had established something new: the Eleanor Caldwell Character Award, a scholarship for young people who demonstrate extraordinary kindness without expectation of reward. Willa was the first recipient. She would not be the last. A week into the semester, a package arrived at her dorm. She opened it. Her hoodie. The one she'd given Eleanor at the bus station. Washed, folded, smelling like lavender. Next to it, a new one. Same style, nicer fabric. A note in Gerald's handwriting. Eleanor insisted we return the original. I insisted we add a spare. G.C. Willa laughed, put on the old one. Still fit, still felt like her. She grabbed her backpack and walked out toward her first class. Halfway across the quad, she noticed a girl sitting alone on a bench, backpack on the ground, head down, the look of someone who had no idea where she was supposed to be and was too embarrassed to ask. Willa slowed down, stopped, sat next to her. "Hey, you okay?" The girl looked up, surprised, relieved. "I'm completely lost." Willa smiled. "Come on, I'll walk with you." They stood up together and headed across the quad, two strangers, side by side, the same way it always starts. Some stories end with big moments, grand gestures, standing ovations. This one doesn't. This one ends with a hoodie. A cheap, worn-out, safety-pinned hoodie that a girl who had nothing gave to a woman she didn't know on a night when nobody was watching. That hoodie didn't change the world. It changed 2 lives. And maybe that's the same thing. Willa Reeves didn't ask for a scholarship. She didn't ask for a powerful man to notice her. She didn't ask for justice or vindication or a seat at anybody's table. She just saw a woman standing in the rain and thought, "She's cold." And that was enough. Eleanor Caldwell doesn't remember most days now. The dementia is slow but steady. But on her good days, she asks about the girl with the warm hands. And when Willa visits, Eleanor holds her hand the same way she did that first night. Like she's holding on to proof that goodness is real. Diane Holbrook is awaiting trial. The foundation has been restructured. The Eleanor Caldwell Character Award has already funded 3 more scholarships for young people whose kindness spoke louder than their circumstances. And Willa? She's in her 2nd semester, still wearing the old hoodie, still stopping when other people walk past. Wait, let me say this real quick. This is exactly why I told this story. 'Cause Willa reminded me of something simple. Kindness doesn't need a reason. It doesn't need people watching. She saw someone cold, and she could help. So she did. That's it. And hey, if this story hit you at all, drop a like, share it, subscribe. We've got more stories like this coming.